It's finally over. Penn State has finally made a head coaching decision after firing James Franklin. Joe, the Penn State Nittany Lions are closing in on a deal to make Matt Campbell their next head coach. After all the turmoil, after all the speculation of missing on multiple coaches, they finally locked in on their guy here, and they went and got Matt Campbell for Iowa State. What are your thoughts?
Blake, I think that there's a couple of layers to this conversation. It's a really actually super complicated one. We're in this spot where they embarrassed themselves with how they handled this process. Completely mishandled it. Every day, past signing day, on signing day, made them look worse and worse that they didn't have a head coach. The names that were getting brought up made it look even more ridiculous because they weren't realistically going to be able to take one of these big names. And then they were looking at promoting their interim coach. Matt Campbell, after all the turmoil, is a good hire. After everything that they went through, it was a good hire because it calmed everything down. Matt Campbell is a good head coach who elevated Iowa State. They consistently won. He took them to a conference championship game last year. For that degree, it was a smart move. But Blake, if we just look in the vacuum of you fired James Franklin to hire Matt Campbell, that's a problem. That cannot be the end result of this. And this is what the whole issue was, is that if you were going to fire Campbell, you should have been able to hire, or if you were going to fire Franklin, you should have been able to hire one of the biggest names out there, and they failed at that. So I've kind of got mixed feelings about this, Blake, and I think that you agree with me on that.
Here's the thing that I would say to a couple of layers that what you just broke down. Number one, Matt Campbell has been a head coach since 2011. So, I mean, he only had one game as a head coach at Toledo. He went 1-0 in 2011. So 14, 15, 16 years, whatever you want to talk about it, he's been a head coach. He's only got 1 year, which was last season, where his team had double-digit wins, okay? And I guess the question you would ask is, what is the expectation of Iowa State with Iowa inside of your state? I do think that he did a relatively good job. You know, Joe, you go down at his time at Toledo, you go down in his time at Iowa State. He only had 2 losing seasons in his entire tenure. The first year that he got to Iowa State and had to rebuild. And then, I mean, I guess you could talk about the 4-8 season in 2022 when, look, the game is changing and they got to refigure some things out. It is what it is. He's at Iowa State. I do think it's a really good hire considering the fact of where they currently are, but they shouldn't have been there. And, you know, the leaked audio by Pat Kraft and saying that my ass is going to get fired if I don't make a decision here and all of these things. It's probably not the hire that you technically wanted, but I do think it's a really good hire. A guy that knows what he's doing, a lot of experience. Joe, the question that I had when I first, you know, when these rumblings first started, what can Matt Campbell do with the talent that would supersede? So when I say that, look what I talked about and started this off in saying he only had 1 season of 10 wins. Look what happened when his talent development and him being able to go into the portal, and they actually gave him money, what he was able to do. I think it's a good hire. However, the second thing I'd say, he's got to straighten that bill out. Bottom line, he's got to straighten out the bill. I know you don't like me saying that, but that is just the other truth. He's got to straighten out the hat. But
can I say, wait, before you continue, yes. I was about to hop on. When I was about to hop on with you, Sean was like right here talking to me, and I go, Blake's going to bring up his hat. I'm telling you right now, Blake is going to bring up. And you're right. He's got to fix his damn hat.
It's like this. It's got to, I mean, go centric. I mean, you got to straighten the bill out. You're now at a massive power 4 head job. You can't have the bill that curved. Okay, he does the flying V. You know what I mean? Like you can't make your bill the flying V. That's neither here nor there. The question, Joe, is I think that this one's up for grabs for me. I think it's a really good hire considering, you know, where you were. But, man, what if this doesn't work out? And here's another thing. To Penn State fans all around, you better give him more than 3 years. You better give him more than 3 years because you just went through a recruiting process where 2 guys signed. He's got to go through a complete and utter rebuild here. You bring up I want to answer your last point. You fire James Franklin to bring in Matt Campbell. I mean, you're not wrong, right, in that premise. I just think things had the time with James had come to an end. And I think that he brings a certain intensity that maybe that program right now is looking for. I think it's a really good hire. It's a lot. He's sustained a lot. He's done a lot of really good things. I'm just really intrigued to see how long that they give him, because this is going to be a little bit of a rebuild after Pat Kraft, quite frankly, made a laughing stock out of himself and made a little bit of a laughing stock out of Penn State. But to circle back and get Matt Campbell is probably I didn't think that they could pull it off, to be honest with you.
Well, what I said to you literally right before we started taping was, if you had gone after Matt Campbell as one of your initial candidates and you recognized what would have worked, a guy that you realistically could have pulled away from his school that didn't have a crazy big contract, that had produced success, I think that this process would have looked fine. It would have called in some questions, but it would have looked fine. If, say, you got turned down by Elko and you got turned down by some of these other big dogs that you were going after, Freeman, and then you went to Matt Campbell and you hired him on the same day as everybody else, I think it would have been less of a circus. But because it got to this point, it looks desperate to a degree. I agree with you. I think
Hold on. Yeah, they are desperate.
Yes. That audio comes out today. The alleged audio comes out today, and they look bad.
Well, there is no real alleged in reference to, like, I see, like, I've seen.
A lot of people kept saying alleged, but you're right. It's
well, yeah, but not the alleged audio, but the alleged that they were desperate. Hold on, no. They were desperate.
Yes,
they had been striking out multiple times, and look, we and you have been waiting to talk about this for a while. Pat Kraft's got to go now. I'm sure this is going to buy him some time. Okay, but my goodness, like, this is, I mean, he fumbled it on this one, but I got to give him credit. He circled back and got back Campbell. Let me tell you, this is what I heard too. I heard that Pat Kraft started calling in a lot of media favors and was like, hey, man, at this point, who would you go after? I'm going to leave that alone. But you're listening to you're listening to people that you probably shouldn't have. But, I mean, Joe, just to clarify, they were desperate. They were massively desperate.
To really talk about what you said and us saying that Campbell's a good coach, he does have tremendous success and underrated success at a program that historically hasn't been super great. When we look at the way that he was able to develop guys into NFL prospects, that, to me, I don't think enough people give Campbell credit for.
Right.
Let's look at Brock Purdy, who's the starting quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. Let's look at Will McDonald, who's one of the best pass rushers in the NFL and was a first-round pick and, went super early not that long ago. Has been really good for the Jets.
Defensive line guy. He played defensive line, even though he's an offensive-minded coach.
And then last year, Blake, you have Jalen Knoll and you have Jaden Higgins, who were really highly drafted players with the Houston Texans. He has put out, that's just a small list of a long list of guys that have been really big name prospects. There has been identification of underrated players that he's turned into guys at a really high clip. It's one of the best turnovers in college football for the limited resources that he had available to him to finding players of that caliber. And now I think that he steps in at Penn State having much more access to be able to go after 4 stars and some 5-star guys. I'd be curious to see what he does. I think that there is a path to success. What I'm more so getting at when I said for the grand picture of this, Franklin, in a way, is very similar to Matt Campbell. The way that Franklin was successful at Vanderbilt, but took them to their ceiling, Campbell did the same exact thing. So I just feel like we're
hold on now. Hold on.
Doing the same exact stuff here. It's just going to be another coach who goes 10-2.
Sidebar.
Okay.
James Franklin didn't get them to their ceiling. Clark Lee did.
Well, Clark Lee broke through the ceiling. I would argue he broke through the ceiling. But
Sure.
but it's to this point where I feel like Matt Campbell is just going to do a lot of what James Franklin just did. If this was a circumstance where James Franklin retired, something bad happened with James Franklin, he left for another job, whatever it was, and you had a vacancy and you went and hired Matt Campbell, I think that the move is great. But when you fired a coach off of the premise of that you were disappointed in the results of your last coach that kept getting you to 10-2 and couldn't win the big games against the big dogs in your conference and the big dogs in the country, why do we think that Matt Campbell is going to be the guy that breaks you through there? Because I don't have a ton of evidence of him doing that when he's been at Iowa State.
Well, but here's the thing. Here's the problem, the premise that I have, or the problem and the premise I have with that. I would have agreed with you in that sentiment if they weren't where they were at the current moment. This is one of the best hires they can make at the moment. So,
right.
If you want to come back to it, I mean, the truth of the matter is that this a massive hire for them considering where they're at. I mean, Joe, a lot of people told them no. You know, I mean, like the whole Matt Rule's going there. That would have been a horrible hire. You know how I feel about Matt Rule.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a horrible coach. But I mean, bottom line, man, there's one thing that I think about too before we kind of wrap this thing up that I need to mention. This ain't the Big 12. You have been at Toledo and you've been in the Big 12. I know that you've gone up against Oklahoma and Texas and things like that. Like, I get all of that. Joe, he better learn how to run the football. And I know in his past he's the run game coordinator, but we've seen his offenses a lot. When Iowa State, by the way, remember when Iowa State fans were killing me this year with their quarterback and Rocco Beck? Hey, where did he finish the season in completion percentage? Just throwing that out there. But regardless of all of that, he better start running the football a lot more. Big Ten is not a conference. The SEC is not a conference where you can just be pass happy and think that you're going to be able to get, you're going to be able to push through. Joe, I look at a situation here too. This year, I know they had a lot to replace, and it's not easy to replace at Iowa State. They went 8-4. I mean, listen, you're going to have to let him rebuild, but he's going to have to understand that you better run the football. Here's the thing too. I'm not, you bet I am not, and I refuse to. This man wins 4, 5, 6 games next year, and people want him fired. I'm going to call for their heads just as much as anything. You're putting him in an impossible situation.
Yeah.
Here, so.
Yeah.
He's got a full-blown rebuild, and good on him. It's a great job for him. It's a great situation for him. And listen, he might go out there and prove everybody wrong, but you're going to have to give him time. And here's another thing. You better go embrace the portal. Embrace the portal. You know, Pat Kraft, there's stuff going out there saying that Pat Kraft kind of limited James Franklin, some things they did. And, look, now that this is over somewhat, let's talk about it. Joe, I heard during this entire coaching carousel that people didn't want to go work for Pat Kraft and didn't want to accept that job because of how hands-on he was in NIL and not wanting to spend the money.
That's a problem.
It's a problem. So you better embrace it, because now you're going to get your ass fired, like you said in your own audio. Final thing I'd just say, listen, it's one thing to deal with guys that you can develop at Iowa State. It's another thing to deal with superstars. And I'm wondering how Matt Campbell also transitions himself after not being in a situation like this and being a head coach for 15 plus years.
That is a very interesting angle of, like, how does he handle the pressure that comes with this? And
because he's had no pressure. I mean, right. I hate to say it like that. He's had no pressure.
He hasn't. And on top of it, as you just brought up, he is going to step into a mess of a roster. I know that they've got some pretty good players that have been recruited, but who knows if some of those guys don't enter the portal. If their upcoming quarterback Grunkemeyer, who showed some nice tools, and Luke Reynolds, who's a really good tight end, if right. Those guys even stick around. But you're going to come into your first year, you're going to probably underperform, and at the very best, you'll win 6, 7 games. How does he handle it? How does he build momentum towards establishing a new culture there? I do think that this will work in the degree of consistency. It just all comes down to, does this reach the end goal of firing James Franklin, of you actually winning the conference and winning playoff games and getting to a national championship? That will be remained to be determined. Because if you give him a giant extension after he puts together a couple of solid years, just like James Franklin did, and then you get stuck, you're going to look awfully stupid.
Well, hold on. We need to get him to a winning season first. Because, again, you brought up an interesting point about the portal. Joe, what if a lot of kids leave? There's a chance that you got to get 30 to 35 kids out of the portal now. You signed 2 players, Joe. They signed 2 players. James Franklin kicked your shit in. I mean, with all due respect, you fired him, and then he pushed Pat Kraft in a locker and shoved him in there like a bully. I mean, the grass isn't always greener, man. And listen, here's another truth. I'm going to say this, and boy, these comments are about to go stupid. You ready? Penn State might need to figure out where they are and who they are. You know, they say, we are Penn State. Where are you? Because you think that you're on the pedestal of the Ohio States, the Oregons, the Notre Dames, the Georgias, the Bamas, the LSUs. You think that you're there. You're not remotely close. You're not remotely close. You got to go out there and show who you are. The first thing you got to do is tell your AD to, as DC Young Fly would say, sit your ass down here, boy. Okay? You got to be who everybody else is. You keep telling me that you are one of the premier jobs and premier programs and premier teams in the country. Well, it's time to start acting like it. You know, Joe, I the last thing I'd say on this, you know, there was a lot of people who said the same thing about one program when Brian Kelly left, and that was Notre Dame. They shut up, they put their head down, and they went to work. Now look at them. Now look at them. So who are you? What can you be? Sometimes accepting reality is the first step of moving into the right direction. And I don't want to hear that it's all James Franklin's fault. You've been a big brand, but you hadn't done really anything of relevance with or without James Franklin, and you just fumbled the bag. And you got lucky that Matt Campbell doesn't talk to teams during the season, and he was willing to listen to you now, because it's exactly what happened.
Hopefully it works out.
Joe, I can't. Let me tell you what I can't stand. What I can't stand is teams saying that, well, we're one of the biggest brands. What have you done? You know, you point down to these other teams that are having quote unquote bad seasons, like Florida or LSU in the SEC, whomstever. But I got SEC title runs for Florida under Dan Mullen not too long ago. I got a national title at LSU. Like, these teams have shown that they can get there in the actual modern era. Like, that they can get there. You keep telling me you're a big brand. Well, go and show everybody. Be quiet, shut your mouth, and know your roles, as The Rock would say, and get to work. Because no one's going to respect you until you do it.
That's ultimately the last part with all this, is that there needs to be an aggressive commitment. You got to give Matt Campbell everything that he needs in his first 3 years. You have to give him aggressive NIL resources. You have to give him the proper infrastructure and help him build out whatever his front office is going to look like, or if it's going to be more centric around the athletic department building, whatever the structure is, it needs to be done to a level that was greater than whatever you had when James Franklin is there. If you want this to come out on top, you have to do everything possible to exceed whatever Franklin built. Otherwise, absolutely, you will start to have an identity crisis. So I 100% agree with that.
You know, if kids were there for Penn State, they wouldn't have left. Like, let me give you an example. What happened when Lane Kiffin went to LSU? Did kids leave?
No, they stayed committed.
Huh. Did kids leave Florida?
Most of them stayed committed.
Huh. Did they stay at Penn State?
Nope. I got 3 kids. 3 kids.
Huh. Reality better start sinking in.